The humidity in Makati doesn't just sit on your skin, it breathes with you, a heavy, wet wool blanket that follows you from the street into the sterile, overcooled sanctuary of the restaurant. I sat in a high backed rattan chair, the kind designed to make Westerners feel like they finally arrived in the Orient they saw in brochures. Outside the floor to ceiling windows, the neon pulses of Greenbelt 5 blurred against the sudden evening downpour. Inside, the air smelled of lemongrass, expensive floor wax, and the faint sweet scent of Elena's perfume. She was perfect. That was the first problem. Elena sat across from me, her posture effortless, stirring a mango shake with a plastic straw. The condensation on her glass was the only thing in the room that seemed to be sweating. She looked better than her profile pictures, a rarity that should have felt like a win, but instead felt like a well laid trap. She wore a simple white linen dress, her hair pulled back to reveal small gold studs that caught the dim amber light of the pendant lamp above us. I was so nervous to come today, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me with a smile that felt like it had been practiced in a mirror until it became a reflex. My cousin told me I was crazy for meeting someone from the internet. I nodded, offering the reassuring smile of the experienced traveler. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the hero of this specific story, the one man who had navigated the digital minefield of international dating and emerged with the prize. I wanted to believe that this woman, who worked in marketing and lived in a modest condo in Quezon City, was exactly as she presented herself, a sweet, slightly traditional girl who was just as lonely as I was. Then there was the phone. It sat between us, face down on the dark wood of the table. It was an iPhone 14 Pro, a device that cost 3 months of a local marketing salary. It was the anchor of our interaction, the silent third party to our date. For the first 10 minutes, it remained still. Then, a dull buzz vibrated through the wood. The screen, though pressed against the table, cast a faint rhythmic glow against the mahogany. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't even glance at it. She just took another sip of her shake, the straw making a tiny hollow sound as she reached the bottom. "You're the first one, you know," she said softly, leaning in. The light caught her eyes, making them look liquid and honest. "I've had the app for months, but I never replied to anyone. Something about your profile just felt different, more sincere." I told myself, "Okay, Elena, just this once. If he's a weirdo, you never do it again." It was a beautiful lie. It was a lie designed to make me feel selected, chosen, and intellectually superior to the other men she hadn't met. It was the opening movement of the first date performance. I looked at the phone again. Another vibration. A short one this time. Probably a WhatsApp notification. Or maybe a message from the cousin who was so worried about her. I knew the script. I had read the forums, listened to the warnings, and even written a few mental notes of my own. But sitting there, under the spell of her attention, the logic felt thin. The cynicism felt like a heavy coat I wanted to take off. "I'm honored," I said, and I meant it, even as the internal auditor in my brain started tallying the cost of the meal, the potential emergency that would inevitably arise in 3 weeks, and the long-term liquidity required to keep that linen dress white. The tension wasn't in what she was saying, it was in the silence between her words and the vibration of the phone. Every time the table hummed, a tiny crack formed in the illusion. She was gauging me, not for my personality, not for my interests in 19th century history or my thoughts on the rainy season, but for my stability. My lead candidate status was being verified in real time. "Are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head with a look of faint concern. "You look like you're thinking very hard about something." "Just thinking about how lucky I am," I replied. The phone buzzed again. 3 times in quick succession. This time, she reached out and placed her hand over the back of the device, her fingers slender and manicured, effectively silencing the light. She didn't turn it over, she just kept her hand there, a gentle weight on the truth, while she smiled at me and asked what I planned to do with the rest of my retirement. I looked into her eyes and felt the hook set. I knew I was being audited, but for the first time in a long time, I found myself wondering if I could afford the price of the performance. The rain outside turned into a deluge, blurring the world into shades of grey and neon, leaving only the two of us in the amber glow of the lie. The main course arrived, a deconstructed adobo that looked more like an architectural model than a meal. Elena watched me navigate the plate with a focused, almost clinical intensity. The charm was still there, draped over her like the expensive pashmina she'd produced from her bag. But the warmth in her eyes was starting to feel like a heat lamp, artificial and aimed. I love my job, she said, responding to my question about her marketing firm. But it's so much pressure. Managing international clients, the time zones. Sometimes I feel like I'm living on New York time while my body is in Manila. Which clients? I asked, a simple probe. I used to do some consulting for firms in the States. Maybe I know the agency. For a fraction of a second, the rhythm of her breathing hitched. It was a glitch in the software. Her eyes didn't dart, they fixed on a point just past my left shoulder. Oh, mostly boutique firms, tech startups. My boss is very private about our portfolio. Non-disclosure agreements, you know how it is. She took a bite of her pork, chewing slowly, buying time. I knew how it was. I also knew that people who actually work under NDAs don't usually cite them to avoid naming a single industry or a general niche. It was the second lie, the professional pedigree. It was designed to tell me she didn't need my money, while simultaneously establishing a status that would justify high-end tastes later. The phone on the table hummed again. This time, the screen stayed dark, but a blue light pulsed at the top corner. Your cousin again? I asked, my voice light, though the auditor in my head was already redlining the entry. She's very protective, Elena said, her smile returning, though it didn't quite reach the corners of her mouth this time. She wants to make sure I'm not being kidnapped by a handsome stranger. She's been protecting you every 3 minutes for the last hour, I noted. The mask slipped. It was a micro-expression, a sharp, jagged flash of annoyance that crossed her face before being smoothed over by the practiced grace of a seasoned performer. She picked up the phone, her thumb moving with the blurred speed of someone who lived their entire life in a chat interface. She wasn't just checking a message, she was managing a queue. I'll tell her to stop, she said, her voice tightening. She didn't look at the screen as she typed. She didn't have to. The conversation shifted, but the sweet girl script was fraying at the edges. She began to talk about her family in Pangasinan. It started as a story about her childhood, but the trajectory was predictable. She spoke of her father's health, the rising cost of electricity, and the sacrifice of being the only one who made it to the city. It was the third lie, the noble burden. It wasn't an ask for money, not yet. It was the setup for the emergency that would inevitably occur during our second or third date. I don't mind, she said, her voice dropping an octave. In our culture, family is everything. We don't think about ourselves, we think about the ones we love. Is it like that in your country? Or is everyone just alone? The question was a precision-guided strike. She was testing my empathy, but more importantly, she was testing my guilt. She wanted to see if I was a provider or a loner. She was mapping the boundaries of my liquidity by gauging my reaction to her manufactured hardship. I looked at her, and for a moment, the humidity of the room felt suffocating. I saw the beauty, the white linen, and the liquid eyes, but I also saw the calculation. I saw the way she looked at my watch, a mid-range Seiko, not the Rolex she was likely hoping for, and the way she tallied the cost of the wine I'd ordered. I was no longer a date, I was a feasibility study. I think everyone wants to be part of something, I said, keeping my tone neutral. But sometimes the price of admission is higher than we realize. She tilted her head, her hand still resting on the phone. The blue light pulsed again, a rhythmic heartbeat of another life, another conversation, another candidate perhaps, waiting for his turn in the queue. The doubt wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a low, constant vibration in the wood of the table, matching the silent alerts she was hiding under her palm. The illusion was still beautiful, but the cracks were wide enough now that I could see the machinery grinding underneath. The check arrived in a small leather folder. I didn't look at it. I just placed a stack of pesos on top, enough to cover the meal and a generous tip. Elena's eyes didn't track the money, they tracked my hands. She was looking for the tremor of a man who couldn't afford the gesture, or the casual ease of a man who didn't notice the cost. The audit was over. She stood up to go to the restroom, leaving the iPhone on the table. This time, she didn't leave it face down. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe the performance was simply finished. A notification banner slid across the screen. It wasn't a cousin. It was a message from a Mark in Vancouver. Did you get the grab? I'm waiting at the hotel. Another banner followed, a different name, a different city. How is the marketing meeting going? She came back, but the Elena who sat down wasn't the girl who had been nervous to meet a stranger from the internet. The sweet girl posture had dissolved. Her shoulders were back, her gaze direct, the conspiratorial whisper replaced by a crisp, efficient tone. My cousin, she said, picking up the phone and sliding it into her bag without looking at the screen. She's had an accident. I have to go now. I'm so sorry. The lie was delivered with the bored proficiency of a flight attendant giving a safety demonstration for the 1,000th time. She didn't wait for my reaction. She didn't ask for a second date. She didn't even look back as she navigated the tables toward the exit. I watched her through the glass. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Makati glistening like black oil. A white SUV pulled up to the curb, a grab she had summoned while I was paying the bill. She stepped into the car with the same effortless grace she'd used to stir her mango shake. She wasn't a victim of a noble burden, and she wasn't a sweet girl looking for sincerity. She was a professional managing a portfolio. I was the 7 p.m. slot, and my liquidity had been deemed sufficient for a second round, or perhaps just enough to fund the dinner that fueled her trip to the next meeting. The amber glow of the restaurant felt cold now. The lemongrass and expensive wax couldn't hide the smell of the street, the raw, metallic scent of a city where everything, including the feeling of being special, had a market value. I sat there for a long time, the empty mango shake glass between us. I wasn't angry. You can't be angry at a machine for functioning correctly. The words had been a courtesy, a layer of velvet over the teeth of the transaction. The truth wasn't in the lies she told. It was in the silence of the SUV pulling away into the neon dark. I had paid for the performance, and like any good customer, I'd been given exactly what I could afford. I walked out of the restaurant and into the thick equatorial night, the kind that feels like it's trying to reclaim the city for the jungle. Makati was still screaming with life, with the roar of jeepneys, the rhythmic thud of club bass from a street away, and the persistent, chirping invitations from girls standing outside the bars who didn't bother with the white linen or the marketing NDAs. They were the budget version of the performance I'd just funded, the same commodity without the velvet wrapping. I realized then that the lies weren't meant to deceive me, they were meant to protect me. Elena didn't tell me I was the only one because she thought I was gullible enough to believe it. She told me because she knew I was desperate enough to need it. The script exists because the truth is too heavy to carry through a 3-course meal. The truth is that in this corner of the world, romance isn't a spark, it's a structural adjustment. I looked at my own reflection in a dark shop window, a middle aged man with a passport and a pension, searching for a relevance I could no longer command back home. I wasn't the victim of a scam. I was a willing participant in a trade. I had come looking for a soul untouched, but what I really wanted was to buy the feeling of being the sun in someone else's sky, even if I had to pay for the fuel to keep it burning. The 5 lies are just the terms and conditions of the contract. You sign them the moment you download the app, the moment you book the flight, the moment you sit across from a woman whose family's survival is tethered to your capacity for self delusion. She provides the grace, the liquid eyes, and the practiced whispers. You provide the liquidity that keeps the machine greased. It is a perfectly balanced ecosystem of mutual necessity. I hailed my own grab, the screen of my phone lighting up with a dozen new profiles, a fresh queue of candidates ready to tell me I was different, special, and the very first one they'd ever agreed to meet. I felt a strange, cold peace. The performance was over, the audit was closed, and I finally understood the rules of the house. You don't come here to find a wife. You come here to rent a version of yourself that you actually like.